The invitation wasn't supposed to arrive. That's the first thing I thought when I saw it sitting on my kitchen counter, a thick cream envelope with my sister's handwriting on the front. My name, written in that careful cursive she only used for important things. But I'd already been to her wedding 3 weeks earlier, so why was she sending me something now? I almost didn't open it. I'd just come off a 72-hour rotation at the station, still smelling faintly of smoke and exhaustion, and all I wanted was coffee and silence. But something about the weight of that envelope made me stop. I set down my gear bag and tore it open. It wasn't an invitation. It was a photograph. A single print, no note, no explanation. Just an image I'd never seen before, taken at the reception, in the mirror behind the head table. My husband Nathan and my sister Lydia, standing closer than they should have been, his hand on her waist, her head tilted toward his ear. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I don't remember deciding to sit. My legs just stopped working. The photo had been taken by the second shooter, a quiet young man named Owen who'd been hired to capture candid moments. He must have printed it and slipped it into the envelope himself, no explanation, because he knew an explanation would sound like accusation. He let the image speak, and God, did it speak. I sat on that floor for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. The coffee maker beeped twice, done brewing, waiting. My turnout jacket was still half unzipped, the reflective strips catching the morning light coming through the window. I was a firefighter. I'd pulled people out of structures that were actively collapsing. I'd made decisions in 30 seconds that other people spent weeks second-guessing. But sitting there on my kitchen floor, I couldn't decide whether to breathe. Nathan was my husband of 22 days. Lydia was my sister for 31 years. I finally stood up, poured the coffee I didn't taste, and stared at the photo again on the counter. My mother always said I had what she called the steady gene. It skipped Lydia, she'd say with a tired smile. But you, Anna, you were born holding still. She meant it as a compliment. Right now, all I could think was that holding still was the loneliest thing in the world. I didn't call Nathan. I didn't call Lydia. I put the photo in the back of my duty notebook, behind the incident logs, and I went to bed. I slept 4 hours. When I woke up, I already knew what kind of person I was going to be about this, not the kind who falls apart before she has facts. The next morning, I drove to the venue where the wedding had been held, a restored vineyard about 40 minutes outside of Asheville, the kind of place that smells like cedar and old money and everyone's idea of a perfect beginning. I found the event coordinator, a warm woman in her 60s named Pat, who recognized me immediately. "The bride's sister," she said, smiling. "You gave such a beautiful toast." "Thank you," I said. I actually had a quick question. "The second photographer? Owen? Do you have his contact information?" She looked at me for just a second too long. "Of course. Let me grab that for you." When she came back, she handed me a card. Then she paused, her hand on mine just briefly. "He's a good young man," she said. "He takes his work seriously." I understood what she wasn't saying. I called Owen from the parking lot. He answered on the second ring, and when I said my name, there was a long pause before he said, "I wasn't sure if you'd reach out." "The photo?" I said. "Were there others?" "Yes. I'd like to see them." We met at a coffee shop near his studio 2 days later. He brought a folder. He didn't slide it across the table dramatically or make it into a moment. He just set it down and looked at me and said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know what the right thing to do was. I just knew that not telling you felt worse." I opened the folder. There were 6 photographs. Different angles, different moments throughout the evening. The earliest was time-stamped at 7:14 p.m., before the first dance. In one, Lydia was laughing at something Nathan had whispered. In another, their hands were touching beneath the table. The last one was outside, near the string lights at the edge of the vineyard, and the way they were standing said everything that no one had bothered to say to me. I closed the folder. "How long do you think it's been going on?" I asked Owen. "I'm a photographer," he said gently, "not a detective." but the way they moved around each other, that wasn't new. I drove home through the mountains, the road winding through gaps in the trees where you could see the valley spread out below, everything golden and green and completely indifferent to what I was carrying. I had a decision to make, or actually, I had about a dozen decisions to make, and they all depended on what I found out first. I wasn't angry yet. That might sound strange, but I've learned something from years of running into burning buildings. Panic and anger will get you killed. You feel them, you note them, and then you set them aside until the structure is stable. The structure was not yet stable. That night, Nathan came home from work in Charlotte. He was in commercial real estate, always traveling, always a conference call away from something important, and he kissed my cheek and asked what I wanted for dinner. I said whatever he felt like. I watched him move around our kitchen, easy and comfortable, and I thought about the way you can live inside a lie for years and never know the foundation is hollow. "How's Lydia?" I asked. He didn't miss a beat. "Haven't talked to her since the wedding, actually." "You?" "Not recently," I said. He nodded and opened the fridge. I watched his shoulders, the set of them, the slight looseness that people carry when they believe they're safe. He believed he was safe. I went to bed that night with my phone, face down on the nightstand, and my mother's voice playing in my head. She'd passed 2 years before the wedding, ovarian cancer, the kind that moves fast and doesn't apologize. She'd held my hand in those last weeks and told me, "Anna, the hardest thing about loving people is knowing which ones deserve the love you give them." She'd been talking about herself and my father, I think, and their complicated 38 years, but the words had settled somewhere deep in me, and now they were rising back up. I thought about my father's ring, the one my mother had kept in her jewelry box after he died. She'd left it to me in the will. Not to Lydia, to me. And she'd written a small note that said simply, "For the one who knows how to keep a promise." I didn't sleep well. The next morning, I pulled up the shared photo cloud that Lydia and I had created for the wedding planning. Dresses, venues, vendor contacts, seating charts. We'd used it for months. I'd never thought to look too carefully through all the subfolders. There were a lot of them. The one labeled vendor receipts didn't have vendor receipts. It had text screenshots, hundreds of them, exported from a phone I didn't recognize the number of, but the contact name in Lydia's screenshots was saved simply as N. The timestamps ran back 14 months. 14 months before our wedding. A month before Nathan had proposed to me on the trail behind my parents' old house where we used to go when the world got loud. I read until my eyes burned. "Don't worry. She trusts me completely. She always has. She'll be so happy. She always has. She'll be so happy planning this. She loves this kind of thing. It'll keep her busy. I can't keep doing this if you actually go through with it. I mean it this time." And Nathan's replies, careful and calm. "You knew what this was. Don't complicate it now." I closed the laptop. I walked to the back of my closet and found my old Fire Academy hoodie, the one that smelled like the person I was before any of this. And I sat on the closet floor and I cried. Not the loud kind of crying. The quiet kind that happens when grief is too big to make sound. My neighbor Ray knocked on my door around noon. He was retired Army, mid-60s, a man who mowed his lawn with the same discipline he probably applied to everything else in his life. He had a container of his wife's chicken soup. "Sarah sent this," he said. "She figured you hadn't eaten much this week." I stared at him. How did she know? He looked at me steadily. She didn't. She just figured a newlywed on back-to-back shifts probably wasn't eating right. He paused. "But I've been watching you, Anna. You've got the look." "What look?" "The one soldiers get right before a hard decision." He held out the soup. "Eat something, then make the decision." I took the soup. He turned and went back down my front steps without another word. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for me in weeks. I ate the soup at the kitchen counter and thought about what kind of hard decision I was actually facing. Nathan wasn't just my husband. He was my husband, who had been the financial co-signer on our house, who had a business partnership with a man I worked with at the station through a charity fundraiser, and who I now realized had suggested that we combine our email accounts into one shared family account about 6 months ago. I'd said that seemed old-fashioned. He hadn't pushed. But I remembered thinking it was odd, so I went looking. It took 2 days and a favor from a woman I'd trained with at the academy who now worked in insurance fraud. She wasn't doing anything illegal, just helping me understand what I was looking at when I found the paper trail. Because there was a paper trail. Nathan had been moving money, small amounts, slow and careful, rerouted through a joint savings account we'd opened after the engagement, an account I assumed was for house renovations and didn't check regularly. Over 14 months, $31,000 had been quietly shifted toward a separate account I'd never heard of. The account was in both his name and one other, Lydia's. I sat with that for a long time. The betrayal had never been only emotional. It was financial. It was structural. He hadn't just fallen for someone else. He'd been building something else, quietly, while I was on 48-hour shifts hauling hose, and he was telling me he was proud of me. The anger came then. Not the hot, chaotic kind. The cold kind. The kind that makes you very, very precise. I called my captain the next morning and asked for 3 days of personal leave. He gave it without asking why. I'd used maybe 4 personal days in 5 years, and he was smart enough to know something serious was happening. Then I called an attorney who specialized in financial fraud, someone a colleague had used when her ex had drained a business account. And then I called my father's brother, my Uncle Pete, who was the only person in my family who knew how to keep a secret and had the emotional steadiness of a man who'd simply seen too much of life to be surprised by any of it. He drove 3 hours to sit at my kitchen table. He listened to everything. He looked at the documents I printed. Then he folded his hands, looked at me over his reading glasses, and said, "Your mother always said you were the one who'd handle things right when things went wrong." I laughed a little. It hurt. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want the truth in a room," I said. "I want to watch them tell it out loud." Uncle Pete nodded slowly. "Then let's set the table." We chose a Saturday evening. I told Nathan I wanted to do a small family dinner, just us and Lydia, because I'd been feeling disconnected since the wedding chaos. He said that sounded great. I told Lydia the same thing, separately, and she said yes with just half a second of hesitation that I now knew how to read. I cooked roast chicken, the recipe my mother had taught us both, the one she'd made for every hard conversation our family had ever needed to have. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and butter and something that felt dangerously close to normal. I set the table with the good dishes. I put my mother's old candlesticks in the center. I placed a small framed photo on the sideboard, the 3 of us, Mom, Lydia, and me, at the river house the summer before she got sick. All of us squinting into the sun and laughing at something someone off camera had said. I put it where both of them would have to see it when they sat down. Owen had sent me something that afternoon. A voice memo, not photographs this time. He'd apparently run into Lydia at a coffee shop 2 weeks after the wedding, and she'd said something to him without knowing he'd send me anything. Just in passing, the way people talk when they think there are no witnesses. He'd recorded it on instinct. I'd heard it once and put it on a small Bluetooth speaker on the kitchen counter, ready. Nathan arrived at 6:15. Lydia came 10 minutes later, her smile tight at the edges in a way I recognized now for what it was. We ate. The food was good. The conversation was the hollow kind that happens when everyone in the room knows something is wrong, but no one has said it yet. Nathan talked about a deal closing in Charlotte. Lydia talked about a work trip coming up. I asked questions. I refilled glasses. I was very calm. After the plates were cleared, I sat back down and said, "I want to show you both something." I took the folder of photographs from the counter. I laid them on the table between the candlesticks, one by one. No words. Just the images in order, ending with the one from the edge of the vineyard, the last photograph Owen had taken, the one where there was no ambiguity left. Lydia went pale. Nathan went very still. The kitchen was quiet except for the candles and, outside, a car passing slowly down the block. "How long?" I asked. Nathan looked at the table. Anna. How long? Lydia said my name in a voice I'd never heard her use before, broken in a specific way, the way something sounds when it's finally stopped pretending. 14 months, I said, since neither of them seemed ready to say it. I know about the account. I know about the money. I know what the screenshots said. I looked at my sister. I know he told you she trusts me completely. She flinched like I'd struck her. I need one of you to tell me something true, I said. Just one true thing. Right now. In this room, with Mom's dishes and Mom's candles and her recipe in this kitchen she taught us both to cook in. Silence. Then Nathan said, I didn't mean for it to get this far. But it did, I said. I told myself it would stop after the wedding, he said. That we could. I thought I could. You thought you could manage it, I said. Like a project. He looked at me and I saw something in his face I hadn't seen before. Not guilt, exactly. Something smaller and sadder. He'd been a coward for a long time and was only now seeing the shape of it clearly. I reached over and pressed play on the speaker. Owen's recording was 40 seconds. Lydia's voice, light and careless the way she got when she thought no one was paying attention, saying, I know it's complicated, but honestly, I've wanted him since before they were even serious, and she doesn't fight for things the way I do. She just holds still and expects everything to stay. The recording ended. I reached over and turned off the speaker. Lydia had her hand over her mouth. I hold still, I said quietly, because I'm a firefighter. Because holding still is how you stay alive in a room that's burning. It doesn't mean I don't feel the heat. I looked at her. I felt all of it. Nathan started to say something about counseling, about working through it, about how these things were complicated. I listened. I let him finish. Then I slid a document across the table that my attorney had prepared. A separation agreement, the financial restitution for the diverted account already outlined. You can take that with you tonight, I said. Your attorney will know what it means. He picked it up slowly. He looked at it. His jaw tightened. And the money? Lydia said quietly. Has already been flagged with my attorney. If it's not addressed in the agreement, the next conversation happens at a different kind of table. She nodded. She didn't argue. I think, in some part of her, she'd been waiting for this. The way you can be relieved when a storm you've been watching on the horizon finally arrives and you find out you're still standing. I stood up and walked to the front door and opened it. Not dramatically, just practically. Nathan, you can get you things this week. I'll have someone here. Lydia, I paused. I need you to not contact me for a while. However long that takes, I'll let you know. She walked past me without looking up. Nathan stopped in the doorway and looked at me for a long moment. I'm sorry, he said. I know you are, I said. That's the part that would have mattered 6 months ago. I closed the door. I stood in the hallway for a minute listening to 2 cars start and pull away from the curb. Then I went back to the kitchen and blew out the candles and stood in the quiet dark that was all mine. I called Uncle Pete. He answered on the first ring. It's done, I said. How do you feel? I looked at my mother's candlesticks on the table, still smoking faintly. Like I just cleared a structure that looked stable and wasn't. But you got out. I got out, he exhaled. Good girl, your mother would say. I know what she'd say. I smiled a little, surprising myself. She'd say, don't leave the dishes. He laughed. It was a good sound. I needed it. The months that followed were the quietest I'd ever lived inside. Not empty quiet, full quiet. The kind that happens when you stop arranging yourself around someone else's schedule, someone else's mood, someone else's version of who you're supposed to be. I kept my shifts. I kept my house. I ran the same trail behind my parents' old place every Saturday morning, the one where Nathan had proposed, until it stopped belonging to that memory and started belonging to me again. It took about 6 weeks. Ray and his wife Sarah had me over for dinner most Sunday evenings that winter. They never made it a big thing, never treated me like I was fragile. They just set an extra place at the table and asked me about the week, and made me eat something home-cooked. Ray always walked me to my car when I left. One evening, he said, "You know what I noticed about you when you moved into that house?" "What?" "You were the only one who shoveled the Henderson sidewalk without being asked." I didn't know what to say to that. "That's the kind of person you are," he said. "Don't let any of this make you think different." I drove home with the windows down even though it was cold. The legal process was slower than the emotional one. The separation agreement settled in late spring. The financial account was fully documented and restitution made, quietly, the way these things often are when both parties want it over without witnesses they can't control. My attorney was efficient and unsentimental and excellent. I heard through my cousin that Lydia had moved to Portland. I didn't ask for more details. I wasn't ready, and I was learning to respect the difference between what I could handle and what I was supposed to perform handling. Owen reached out once, a short text. "I hope I did the right thing." I wrote back, "You did. Thank you for trusting me with it." He sent back a single photograph, taken without my knowledge one afternoon when I'd been at the station. I was on the roof of a building, gear on, the city spread out behind me, looking out at something off frame. My posture was very straight. The photograph was called, in his text, "Looking Forward." I printed it and put it on my refrigerator. That summer, the department asked me to speak at an orientation for new recruits, specifically about mental health and crisis management, not because I pitched myself, because my captain had put my name forward without asking me first. When I called to say I wasn't sure I was the right person, he said, "You are exactly the right person. Because you've been through something this year that would have broken a lot of people, and you're still showing up." I showed up. I stood in front of 18 recruits, men and women, most of them younger than me by nearly a decade, all of them with that specific shininess of people who haven't yet learned what the job costs. "I want to tell you something nobody told me in training," I said. "The hardest fire you will ever work is not a structure fire. It's not a car fire. It's not a wildland incident." I paused. "It's the one that starts inside your own life. And unlike structure fires, there is no protocol, there is no incident command system. There's only you, deciding what is worth saving." The room was very quiet. "The goal is not to come out unchanged," I continued. "The goal is to come out. Still yourself. Maybe more yourself than before." Afterward, a young woman came up to me. She had the careful posture of someone who'd been trying to take up less space for a long time. She said, "Ma'am, how do you trust people again after something like that?" I thought about it honestly. "You don't trust blindly," I said. "You learn to trust the evidence, what people do over time, what they do when it costs them something." I looked at her. "And you start with trusting yourself. That's the hardest one and the most important." She nodded. Her eyes were wet at the edges, but she didn't look away. I liked her for that. After the session, I sat in my car in the parking lot for a while. Through the windshield, I could see the station flagpole, the flag moving in a small breeze off the mountains. I thought about my mother's note, the one that had come with my father's ring. For the one who knows how to keep a promise. I'd kept every promise I'd made. I kept them when no one was watching and when keeping them cost me things I hadn't expected to lose. That evening, I went to the cemetery. My mother's grave was simple, just her name and dates and a small engraved line she'd chosen herself. She showed up. I crouched in front of it for a while, running my finger along the letters. "I think I understand now," I said quietly. "What you meant about knowing which people deserve the love you give them." I paused. "I'm learning to give some of it to myself." The air was still. Somewhere nearby a mourning dove was doing what mourning doves do, steady and unhurried and completely unbothered by anything. I stood up. I put my hand on the stone for a moment. Then I walked back to my car and drove home through the early evening light, windows down, taking the long way because the long way went past the river, and I liked the sound of it this time of year. On my kitchen counter sat my father's ring in a small glass dish. I hadn't put it on. I hadn't put it away. I was still deciding what it meant to keep a promise to someone who is gone, and what it meant to let the shape of your life expand into something they couldn't have imagined for you. I made tea. I sat on the back porch. The neighborhood was doing its evening things. Kids on bikes, a lawnmower somewhere 2 streets over, someone's dog announcing something urgent to no one in particular. Uncle Pete texted, thinking about you. How's the rebuilding going? I typed back, slower than a structure fire, which actually means it'll hold. He sent back a single thumbs up, and I knew he understood. The thing nobody tells you about the aftermath of a betrayal is that it isn't dramatic. It isn't one big moment of triumph or closure. It's a Tuesday when you realize you made plans for the weekend, and you're actually looking forward to them. It's a morning when you wake up, and the first thought you have isn't about any of it. It's Owen's photograph on your refrigerator, and the fact that you printed it and you know what that means. It means you're still here, you're still you, and you've decided that's enough to build from. If you've ever had someone you loved completely rewrite the story you thought you were both in, you know this kind of quiet, the kind that comes after. And if you're still in the middle of it, still standing in the burned-out structure wondering what's worth saving, you're not alone. You don't have to have it figured out today. You just have to stay in it long enough for the smoke to clear. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since everything happened. Not in some abstract philosophical way, just the plain, practical version of it that you start to see clearly when the noise finally settles. Every choice Nathan made had a consequence. Every choice Lydia made had one too. And every choice I made, especially the ones I made quietly, alone, without anyone watching, had consequences of their own. That's the thing nobody warns you about. The people who betray you are usually counting on you to stay small, to cry privately, to doubt yourself, to wonder if maybe you're reading it wrong. Nathan counted on my trust. Lydia counted on my stillness. They mistook the way I hold myself for passivity. They thought steady meant blind. What I learned, and this took longer than I want to admit, is that character isn't something you perform when people are watching. It's what you do at 2 a.m. when nobody is there and you have the evidence in your hands and every angry, impulsive option is available to you. I had options. I could have sent those screenshots to everyone who knew them. I could have made it loud and public and devastating. Instead, I sat with my father's ring in my hand and I made a list. I secured the evidence. I found an attorney. I called Uncle Pete. I moved slowly, and I moved right. That's not righteousness. That's just the understanding that how you respond to being wronged is the only part of the whole situation you actually get to own. Nathan and Lydia owned their choices. I owned mine. And mine are the ones I have to carry forward. The tricky thing about betrayal from people that close is that it shakes your trust in your own judgment first. Before you're angry at them, you're angry at yourself, for not seeing it, for being the kind of person who got here. I went through that. I sat on my kitchen floor and I questioned everything I thought I knew about reading people. But eventually, I came out the other side of that particular fire, and I understood. I wasn't wrong to trust. Trusting people is not a flaw. What's worth examining is whether you stay, once the evidence is no longer ambiguous. I didn't stay. That matters. Owen did a quiet, courageous thing by sending me that photograph. He didn't have to. He had nothing to gain, and potentially something to lose. He did it because he understood that truth has a cost, and he was willing to pay a small part of it so I didn't have to pay everything. I think about him sometimes when I'm tempted to stay out of something that isn't technically my problem. Real integrity shows up in the small decisions, the ones that don't get applause. And Ray, who brought soup when he had no particular reason to, he knew something was wrong because he was paying attention to the world around him. That kind of neighborly attentiveness is not small. It's what holds communities together. It held me together on a day when I needed it. I'm not the same person I was 22 days into that marriage, standing on the kitchen floor with a photograph I didn't ask for. I'm clearer. I'm less afraid of loss because I've learned I can survive it and still recognize myself on the other side. I work with people now who are at the beginning of hard things, and I tell them the goal isn't to come out unchanged. The goal is to come out still yourself. Maybe more yourself than before. That's what I'm still working on. Becoming more myself. It turns out that's a full-time project, and the starting conditions were better than they looked.